Well, welcome back to the homestead. I know in a recent episode I mentioned I wanted to hire a trim carpenter to come out and do all of my doors, windows, and baseboards. And we've tried to find a couple of different trim carpenters, and none of them are panning out, so looks like we're just going to wind up having to knuckle down and do it ourselves. So in order to get that process started, the first thing I need to do is work on these large door openings. Now I've got 4 of those here in the living area, and then I've got 2 of them in the master bedroom that are just going to get cased and trimmed, and there's no door on them. So these are what I want to start working on today. However, there's been a couple of design changes throughout the evolution of this house. So some of the changes for the cabinetry and then the changes for the trim that we've made don't work well together. So in order to keep our pantry door and the door over by the refrigerator, those cabinet doors from opening into the trim work and being marred up, we're going to have to adjust the door openings just a little bit so that everything clears. In order to do that, I'm just going to take some 2x4s and scab onto the inside edge of these doors, and then we'll trim over that and you'll never know it. So we need to get that done. And in addition to that, when I rough the openings in, I rough them up in a little too tall. So I need to add a 2x4 across the top of these openings. So let's go ahead and get that started. And then once we're done with that, we'll see if we can get the table saw rolled in here and run some 1x6 material through it to cut some casing material. And then we'll start getting that nailed up. So let's go ahead and get to it. All right, so like I said, the trim that we're looking to do around the top here is like kind of like a cove molding, so it'll come out from the wall a couple of inches and then turn back in. And if we trim that where it's at right here, when this pantry door opens, you can see that it would wind up, the edge of the trim would hit the corner of this doorway. So we're just gonna take this door and move it this way just a little bit. All right, so I got my 2x4s on here. Now, the trim that I'm going to use going up the sides is a 1x4, which is really only like 3.5 inches wide. So I am very close, once I add my casing on here, to not having any trim covering the raw edge of this sheetrock. But it should just overlap it just a little bit. So we'll have to come back in and add some sheetrock filler right here just to space the trim out. But once we're done with that, it should do just fine. And then you can see as we open the pantry door up, we'll have a few inches between the pantry door and the edge of the trim, so they shouldn't interfere with each other. So let's go ahead and do the rest of the doorways now. All right, so on this door going from the kitchen to the dining room, these cabinets actually extended out farther than we originally intended. And that only left us 1 7/8 inches between the cabinet and the face of this door opening. So that's not going to be enough room to trim this out. So what I'm going to do here is the same thing we just did in the kitchen to living room. We're going to add a 2x4 at the top to space it down, and then we're going to add 2 2x4s to this side. And we're not going to add any 2x4s on this side because we don't want to make the door any narrower than we have to, so we're only going to adjust this one side. So that will give us enough room to put some trim here. It will not, however, eliminate the problem of this door opening into the trim at the top. So we're probably going to wind up having to put a limit strap on this door so that it won't open all the way and get into the trim. So shouldn't be a big deal because this is a very shallow cabinet. It's only about 4 inches deep. So not having the door open a full 90 degrees won't be a big deal. But let's go ahead and add some 2x4s to this opening. All right, so now that we have our 2x4s in the openings and the rough opening is the size that we want it, we pulled our table saw in and we ran some 1x6 material through it to rip it down to the width of these walls, and that's what we're going to use for our casing material. I've already got the casing cut for this particular doorway, but it's not secured yet. So I'm getting ready to secure it, and what I've done is I've put a piece of scrap wood across the corners on the front and the back on both sides, and then just put a clamp in that to hold that together. And my door casing will sit right in between those, and that centers it up on the drywall, because these are a little bit far away from the drywall. It's hard to eyeball it, make sure you have it straight, but these corner braces will center that up for me. So what I'm going to do now is take my level and put on here, and then we'll shim this until it's plumb, and we'll use our brad nailer to secure it, and then we'll just work our way all the way around the opening doing that. All right, so now that we have the casing up on this doorway, I think what I'm going to do is go ahead and put some trim up on at least one side of it, because my wife and I had picked out a type of trim that was a little bit more elaborate, and we really liked it. But when I started trying to look at the individual openings and get a list of materials for it, we found out that there's just too many doors and windows that are too close to a corner for the type trim that we really wanted to put in. Too many of them would be butting up into the corner or not have enough room for the trim at all. We'd have to do something alternative to it, and we didn't want to do that. We kind of want to keep everything consistent throughout. So long story short, instead of having a square piece at the bottom of the base, and 1x4s going up the side, and then a 1x6 across the top with a small piece of molding towards the bottom third, and then crown molding across the top, what we've decided to go with is just a single piece molding that's a little bit more traditional or simpler anyway, but not the standard like builder grade of molding. So this still has like a 1 inch or a 3/4 inch depth to it, so it gives a little bit more depth of feeling to the trim, but it is going to be a single piece, and I think it's like 4.5 inches wide. So before we go and buy enough of that to do the entire house, I want to put it up around at least one opening so that my wife can see it in place and say, yes, I definitely like it, or let's maybe consider going back with something else. So first thing to do in order to put the trim up around here is I need to mark my reveal on the casing. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to mark a 1/4 inch down the side and across the top, down the other side in a few places, so that we'll know when I go to put my trim up just how far down that trim has to come. And we'll use those marks to get our measurements for the trim. So let's go ahead and do that. All right, so now that I've got the 1/4 inch reveal marked all the way around, all I did was measure from the corner over here to the corner over here, and I went ahead and cut the top piece of trim and just cut it at a 45, and the narrow end of that is the same as the notch on those two. So we're going to go ahead and nail that up, and then we'll get some measurements for the uprights. All right, so you can see I got the trim nailed up around this first entranceway, just so my wife can kind of get a visual of what it's going to look like and make sure that she wants to use this all throughout the house. This is kind of a close-up of what the profile is. So it's 4.5 this way and 1 3/8 this way. And It's not plain Jane, you know, like the 2 1/4 trim that you see in a lot of places, but it's not nearly as elaborate as what we were hoping to put in either. But it does solve some of our problems with the doorways that are too close to a corner, and we have enough room to put this in, but we don't have enough room to put the 6.5 inch stuff in that we were doing. So let's see what she thinks about this.
Pretty.
You like it?
I do.
Think you can live with that throughout the house?
Yep. So these are supposed to stick out like that?
Yep. That's called your reveal.
Okay. Yep. You like it?
Mm-hmm. Only problem I have is, you know, we looked at that wood and some of it was not rounded over very much.
Uh-huh.
After we ripped it, I realized not all of these boards are rounded the same amount. This one has a fairly good round on it. This one up here has next to nothing. So.
Can you not just take, does it matter?
I don't think anybody's ever going to notice
really that big
it.
of a
Once you
deal?
paint it all white, I don't think it's going to be noticeable.
Yeah.
Now, we probably do need to take a piece of sandpaper and just, you know, briefly over this and then paint it, but I think it'll be just fine.
Mm-hmm. Looks good to me.
Well, if you like it, that's what we're going to put up.
Is it the same on each side?
Does it look the same to you?
Well, I only asked that because we had talked about it, and when I was over here, I was like, well, it might look like there's a little more over here, but I hadn't moved over. So that's probably why.
2 1/4 that way. 2 1/4 that way.
You're good. I like it. Okay, what's holding you up from getting all of those done?
Nothing but doing it. All right, so that's one opening trimmed out, and my wife and I have looked at it. We both like it, and we've decided for sure this is the type trim that we're going to do the rest of the house in, as far as the doors and the windows. So let's go ahead and jump to the other side of this doorway and finish it out, and then this doorway will be finished, and then we can jump back to the rest of the openings and do the casings on them. All right, so the next door I want to work on is this one going into from the kitchen to the living room. And I've gone ahead and I've run the 1x6 material through the table saw and got it ripped down to the right width. And then I put it on the chop saw, cut it down to the right length. So it's ready to go ahead and set into the opening now. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go ahead and set it in there, and then we'll start shimming it and getting everything plumb and square. And then we'll brad it into place. And I'm not going to do the trim on this doorway yet, because this particular trim that I'm buying at Lowe's, you can only get in a I think it was an 8-foot stick, and this doorway is wider than that, and I don't want to have to splice it if I don't absolutely have to. So we're going to check a few other places and see if we can find longer pieces of it somewhere. If not, we'll go ahead and splice it, but if we can, we're going to avoid that. So we're just going to do the casing on this door for right now. So let's go ahead and get started on it. All right, well, unfortunately, I've run out of material, so I can't finish casing the last 2 openings, and I can't finish doing any trim work because I'm out of trim. So we're gonna have to wrap the video up here. I'll have to go back to the store and pick up some more material, and we'll start back on it. But the weekend got off to a really slow start because when we started trying to do the trim, I knew I was gonna have to shim the doors in some to clear some of my cabinets and whatnot. And once I started really putting a tape measure on it, there were several doors that were too close to a corner, and they didn't have the 6.5 inch space needed between the door and the corner for the trim to wrap around and fit correctly. So we were just gonna have to make too many adjustments throughout the house for that trim to really look good, I think. And ultimately we decided on scaling it back a little bit to this single piece of trim that you see here. So this trim takes three pieces to do an opening. Each side of the opening, the other way we were gonna do it would take 2 blocks at the bottom, 2 uprights, a header, 3 pieces of wainscot molding or wainscot trim, and then 3 pieces of crown trim. So it was quite a few more pieces that you had to cut and fit together and everything. It's very pretty, but it just takes more time to do. So scaling it back to this, we're both happy with the way it looks, and it's a little easier on the pocketbook, and it's a whole lot easier on my skill set to install it. So I think we made a good choice in scaling that back just a little bit. And like I said, unfortunately, that took several trips back to the store to look at different moldings and settle on a new game plan there. Once we got that done and we picked up some materials, we started rolling a little bit better. And we've gotten this door completely trimmed out. The casing and the trim on both sides is done. I've got all of my doors except 2 with the door casing in. I'm out of shims. And then we've got one side of another door completely trimmed out, and the second side of that, I've got 2 of the 3 legs done, and I just ran out of material for that last upright. So we'll pick up some more material and we'll get started back on it, but for today, that's going to do it. So till next time, y'all just keep checking back.